Good afternoon and welcome to the Data Center Environmental Sustainability Forum. Data center energy usage could consume over 10% of the global electricity supply by 2030 at the current growth rate. Similar increases are also forecasted for the gas emissions and e-waste, but the technologies to counter this growing problem are available. Today we'll be talking about how we can manage the environmental sustainability of the data center with seasoned data center professional Otto de Roo. De Roo has been involved in managing 13 mission-critical data centers, including new build, renovation and migration. He has worked in daily operations, initiated green initiatives and executed strategic level projects. De Roo introduced an environmental approach to realize a reduction of 20 to 30% in power consumption. That's Otto de Roo. My name is Lars Sørensen and this is the Data Center Environmental Sustainability Forum. Welcome Otto. Data center demand is growing explosively and the technologies such as Edge and 5G will make the demand for data even better. But energy consumption is already an issue. So it feels we're moving towards a major energy shortages in the future, raising the question, how bad exactly is it? Let's break this down together.
We thought about 10 years ago it was going to be very bad. Yeah, the estimates in 2010 were that, well, the best case scenario was that we are going to use 3 times more energy in 2030 compared to 2010. Worst case scenario even went to 10 times more, which would mean 13% of the global electricity consumption.
That's huge. So, but then these were the assumptions. But what did actually happen?
Yeah. Well, actually, the global data center use was, and I'm talking about the energy use, was only 6% more, which was measured in 2018 compared to 2010, while the data center compute instances actually rose by 550%.
Whoa.
So nowadays we can say that the data centers are using about 1% of the global electricity usage, but it varies per region. Yeah, we have seen in Europe, in Amsterdam, but also in Frankfurt, there is a restriction on new built data centers, but also the same goes for Singapore, for instance, where 7% of Singapore's total energy consumption is just used by data centers.
Wow.
Do not forget, data centers emit actually as much CO2 as the commercial airline industry. And of course, that was on the pre-COVID situation.
Yeah. So I can totally understand that this also makes for some negativity around the growth and the impact. But what's the expectation regarding the demand for energy that's coming?
Well, since 2010, the number of internet users worldwide has doubled, and the global internet traffic has grown 12-fold. And things like the COVID-19 situation did make things actually worse, because due to home-based working, etc., the internet traffic surged by almost 40% between February and mid-April 2020. We actually expect that it will grow even more, because the number of mobile internet users is projected to increase from around 4 billion today to 5 billion already in 2025. Wow. And do not forget electrical vehicles, connection of the Internet of Things. They are going to double to maybe 25 billion Internet of Things connections. But also due to COVID-19, we see a huge demand. People are watching more Netflix and other services. So video demand is increasing, and also this applies to online gaming.
Yeah. So, energy is not even the only aspect to take into account when we're talking about sustainability and sustainable data centers. How about water
Correct.
usage?
Well, water usage is another problem because improving electrical energy usage in many data centers resulted in an increase of water usage. Yeah, because people were trying to save money on their electrical infrastructure to build a more efficient cooling using evaporative cooling systems like cooling towers. And they can actually use as much as 1.8 liters of water for every kilowatt hour that the IT equipment consumes in the data center. And actually, water scarcity, well, it was listed by the World Economic Forum as one of the largest global risks in terms of potential impact on the next decade. So it's not only power, but also water.
There are a whole bunch of green standards and guidelines.
Yeah.
Let's try to identify their scope.
Well, actually, each standard and guidelines has its own scope, purpose, but also their own advantages and disadvantages. Yeah. For instance, we have the ISO 14001, which is an environmental management system. In Europe, data centers are using the European Code of Conduct, which not only applies to data center facilities efficiency, but also to ICT efficiency. Other standards like the BREEAM, they have a specific green data center standard. And if you want to focus on energy management, you can use the ISO 5001. There is also a more generic standard like LEED, which is a system for standardizing buildings with a high environmental quality. So low power usage, but also looking at the reusable building materials that are used.
Could you walk us through some of the most important standards and its particular scope?
Well, of course, the data center organization should define and publish the standards and metrics that it will need to use to measure its performance. Of course, you need to comply with any standards and codes required by law, and that can be different per country or region. So you need to establish best practices of using recognized standards, guidelines, and best practices. To give you an idea, you could make use, first of all, of an environmental management system, which actually helps your organization to identify, manage, monitor, and control the environmental issues of your company in a more holistic manner. So ISO 14001, for instance, will set out the requirements for an environmental management system. On the other hand, for instance, the European Code of Conduct is a more practical standard that you can use or guideline because it gives guidance to implementation of how to actually reduce the energy usage in your data center.
So you would say that you could use these guidelines as to create a sustainability framework almost.
Yeah, well, that is actually the purpose of ISO 14001 because it actually gives you the guidance on to develop your own company's environmental policy and also what objectives do you need to target for and how to achieve them. It will also give you context of the organization. It gives you guidelines on internal audits, management reviews, evaluation of compliance to your local standards. And of course, also it will address other risks and opportunities related to sustainability of your activities that you are doing within your company.
Yeah. And then could you tell us what's covered by the ISO 50001?
ISO 50001 is actually more an energy standard.
Okay.
Yeah, it is actually an energy management system, which actually helps you to deploy, to develop a policy for more efficient use of energy. Yeah, so it will also fix targets and objectives to meet that policy and to gather data to better understand and making decisions concerning this energy usage. Yeah, the ISO 50001, as most ISO standards, they are actually based on a plan, do, check, act cycle.
Yeah.
So which actually forces you to continuously improve your energy management.
And what should be considered besides the energy usage?
Well, there are many other things. I think about waste management, water usage. Yeah, data centers do not just need power; they will also need water, but also things like recycling of building materials of your data center structure, recycling and reusing of your ICT equipment, etc.
So then the third topic we'd like to address, managing environmental sustainability, because measuring is knowing, right? So how does the typical data center power usage look like?
We have power for the IT equipment, the microprocessors that are using power. And of course, they get power from the power supply unit, which is located in the IT equipment. We have the ventilators to actually move the cold air through the equipment, but also power distribution units, switchgear, the UPS, the uninterruptible power supply system, lighting, and of course cooling of the data center, which is in especially warm countries a major power consumer.
Yeah. And which factors are influencing the PUE?
Yeah, well, PUE is actually power usage effectiveness, which is one of the most used way to measure the energy efficiency of your data center facilities. Yeah, and it depends on many factors. Obviously, the data center location and the outdoor temperature. Yeah, if you are staying in a tropical country, you cannot use the outdoor air to cool your IT equipment. So you will need to use more power for cooling. Also, whether you have a relatively old data center or a new energy optimized data center, the redundancy levels of your infrastructure in your data center facilities, and of course the computer room utilization levels. Running a large data center with only one rack with equipment operational in that data center will create a large overhead on energy usage for cooling, lights, security, etc.
Yeah. There are different classes, right, in power usage efficiency. Which classes could be identified?
Well, we have the basic, intermediate, or advanced class. They are called by the Green Grid, who is actually making this, well, I would say, guideline. They call it level 1, level 2, level 3. And those 3 levels, they indicate how often do you measure the energy usage, also at what detail are you going to measure it. And level 1 is basic, so I just measure how much power is coming into my data center and how much power is used by my ICT equipment in total. And I can do this on a monthly or weekly basis. With level 2, again, I'm going to go more close to the IT equipment. So now I'm going to measure the power usage at rack level and it needs to be done on a daily or even hourly basis. And with level 3, which is the preferred type of measurement, we are measuring the power usage of the IT equipment individually, where we do this continuously, at least on a 15-minute interval.
But let's say if you're just starting with this, how do you baseline your energy consumption?
Well, first you need to know what are you going to measure. It is not only baselining of your energy consumption, but also you need to measure how much renewable energy you are using, etc. But also how much cooling power do you purchase, how much diesel fuel do you use for your emergency power generators, etc. But if we are going back to the energy usage in the data center, we should create a documented baseline for all categories and parameters that will require to execute its energy usage. And so make sure that those baseline measurements, because as I mentioned earlier, you need to continuously improve the energy efficiency of your data center. So this first measurements should be properly recorded. And of course, all the measuring equipment, including temperature sensors and other probes, should be calibrated. Yeah, and of course, calibration should ideally be done at least within 12 months before you do this baseline measurement.
Yeah. And then how to keep track of your energy consumption?
Well, there are different ways. Normally, we measure ideally on a continuous basis, and we are doing what we call a trend analysis. And in this way, we can identify and analyze the main energy generating and consuming devices. So we can evaluate the trend of energy usage and consumption, but we can also identify which type of equipment has significant energy usage, and we can actually now prioritize any opportunities for energy savings and efficiency improvements. However, it is also very helpful, because when we are measuring, for instance, the energy efficiency of cooling equipment like a chiller, we can actually compare the energy efficiency to the manufacturer specification. Maybe we have put on some wrong set points or parameters on the chiller plant, which might use more energy than was originally intended by the manufacturer. So we can now go in a dialogue with the equipment vendors, how to optimize the energy efficiency for the individual components.
So now that we have like a general idea of all the factors in play, let's see if we can identify some best practices. Where to start saving energy?
Well, where we actually started, where most data centers started, was obviously with cooling. Yeah. However, we see now also that people are looking at power efficient UPSs, uninterruptible power supply systems. People have changed their lights in the data center. They moved maybe to LED lighting, and ideally they created what we called a lights out environment. So when nobody's inside the computer room, why should you keep the lights on? And of course, we should also look at the energy efficiency performance of the IT equipment itself, because that could be a high priority decision factor in the tendering process when you need to buy new equipment. Think about IT equipment with an efficient power supply unit and of course low power usage. Yeah, because all the kilowatts that a server is using, it also has to be cooled down. So if I can reduce my power consumption of the IT environment, I can also reduce the power consumption of my cooling infrastructure.
Could we dive a little bit deeper on the potential of savings on coolings? Because I understand that they could be huge.
Yeah. Um, well, actually, you should do a few steps. First of all, try to raise, if it is possible, the IT equipment air intake temperature. Yeah. S-Ray gives thermal guidelines to IT equipment, and it says that the recommended upper value for the air intake temperature is 27 degrees Celsius. So if you can stay as close as possible to 27 degrees Celsius, this will already save you a lot of energy, because why should you keep the temperature at 20 degrees Celsius if the equipment works also at 27 degrees Celsius? And of course, we could also use economizers. Yeah, in the somewhat colder countries, especially in Northwestern Europe, airside economizers that uses the outdoor air to cool the IT equipment are becoming very common. We can also use water-side economizers. We now use the outdoor air to cool the water by using cooling towers, but again, that will also consume a lot of water. Some people call those free cooling options. Well, it is not totally free. It is actually free of mechanical cooling, because there is still electricity required for water pumps and ventilators for the outside air.
Yeah.
One of the most important items when it comes to cooling is to actually avoid mixing of hot and cold air. Yeah, if you are mixing hot and cold air, it will reduce the cooling efficiency a lot. So containment, hot aisle containment, cold aisle containment are common technologies nowadays to reduce the cooling energy. But there are also nowadays equipment racks in the market which actually has a contained cabinet supply and a contained cabinet return. So that means that every equipment rack has its own cooling system built in.
Wow.
You were asking how much can we save? Well, if we do proper flow management, avoid mixing of hot and cold air, also increasing the temperature in the cold aisle, you will be able to save around 30% of your energy for just cooling.
Wow. Well, that's awesome. And what about data management?
Well, as you most probably know, we are now storing a lot of data. Yeah, actually, every organization should actually have a proper data management policy to reduce the number of copies of data, both logical and physical data. Do not forget that even if you look at your own laptop, you will see that you have a lot of copies of photos, documents, etc. And storage is actually one of the major growth areas, both in cost and energy consumption within data centers. So actually, it is generally recognized that a significant portion of the data that is being stored is either unnecessary, duplicated, or does not require rapid access. So you should review your data storage requirements. And of course, you can use techniques to, again, reduce the power consumption on data storage. New technologies which could save energy. For instance, a solid state drive, an SSD, uses less power and space compared to a hard disk drive. Do not forget, people might not need direct access of some data. So when you are using archive data, it sounds a bit silly, but the old-fashioned backup tapes are still the most sustainable type of data storage, because when you have stored the backup tapes, they do not use energy. Yeah. But of course, you need to comply with the local regulations on how long do you need to store data within your organization. So review new technologies allowing for higher storage density, compression, and maybe relocation of data.
It sounds very old school, but it also sounds sensible. So that's a great example. What about reusing heat? You already mentioned some solutions, but we've spoken earlier about this example in one of our other forums. I'm just curious on your take on that.
Yeah, well, try to be creative. Yeah. So try to go beyond reducing energy, but also try to reuse the heat. Reusing heat, especially in cooler climates, can be an energy efficient solution. You can, for instance, very simple way to duct the waste heat from the computer room into the nearby offices to heat your employees. Yeah. So when we are even using sustainable energy, we actually create zero waste. So this works very well, and there are many examples, specifically in Europe. IBM in Switzerland is reusing the heat of their data center to warm a local swimming pool. Yeah, in Sweden, but also in Finland, data centers are sharing the heat with local residents, replacing the heat energy to actually heat up 500 to 1,000 homes within the vicinity of the data center. And of course, that means that that is a win-win situation. However, there are two major issues with data center waste heat, because the heat which is created by the data center has a relative low temperature, maybe around 30, 35 degrees Celsius, and it is very difficult to transport heat. So to address the low temperature issue, you could actually use heat pumps to create the temperature, to increase the temperature of the waste heat and making it more efficient.
So, and more usable for different situations, I guess.
Correct, correct. There is even a test now going on with the data center, which is actually located next to the power plant. So they actually transfer the heat pump boosted thermal energy back to the power plant for use in the feed water heater or low pressure turbine stages. And now we have actually a very nice closed loop system.
There's a lot of talk about CO2 neutral data centers. And so what are the international and or national standards for this?
Well, there are actually 1,000 environmental standards, but one of the most famous one was the Kyoto Protocol, which was adopted in 1997. That was actually the start to limit the greenhouse gases. 192 parties signed the Kyoto Protocol. Then we had the Paris Agreement, which is a legally binding international treaty on climate change, and its goal was to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius, preferably to 1.5 degrees Celsius, compared to the pre-industrial levels. Within Europe, the EU has committed to the Paris Agreement. And if we look at the EU countries, they need to reduce their greenhouse gases by 40% in 2030. And the EU also had set emission standards for a number of other gases. For example, sulfur oxide, which causes acid rain, should be reduced by 70% in under 20 years.
Another initiative is the Climate Neutral Data Center Pact. Could you tell me something about that?
The Climate Neutral Data Center Pact is a group of data center operators, but also people who are involved in the data center industry, like vendors of data center facility systems. And their target is to make data centers climate neutral by 2030. And they do this by implementing energy efficiency. So the annual PUE target should be 1.3 in the northwestern European countries, and in the very hot southern European countries, 1.4. They also require 75% renewable energy by the end of 2021, and 100% renewable or carbon-free energy at the end of 2030. They will also set annual targets for water usage effectiveness, but that depends on the design specification of the data center. And very important, they encourage a circular economy. So that means the reuse, repair, or recycling of 100% of their used server equipment. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, they are also encouraging data center operators to explore the possibility to interconnect with district heating systems and other uses of heat. That sums up the targets of the Climate Neutral Data Center Pact.
Yeah. So, and then I heard about the open compute movement. Is this is also something that adds to that?
Yeah, Open Compute project is actually a group of companies. Actually, Facebook was one of the founding fathers of this project, where it's a collaborative community that are working since 2011 on redesigning of the hardware technology, where the focus is on saving energy, saving materials, and saving cost. So standardization of scalable, flexible, and efficient hardware. With the Open Computing project, we are not talking about multiple redundant hardware in the data center, but the OCP resilience is based on software. They are going with the concept that less is more. So no faceplates, no expansion slots, no mounting screws. So they eliminate any material that does not serve a specific function to the server, which of course saves cost and reduces the material footprint. So it's a modular building blocks for your data center. The Open Computing project optimizes also the airflow and free air cooling in your server chassis. So they have implemented larger heat sinks to provide more surface area, so more efficient cooling, larger fans, no front bezel on the equipment, so that it does not obstruct the airflow through the equipment. And they even promote local energy storage. So you have a mini UPS in each server rack. And of course, where possible, they are using natural fiber plastic. So it is all about the environment.
So we're not there yet, but I hear a lot of great initiatives and great solutions that we could use.
Yeah.
What would you hope that people take away from all this?
Well, actually, there are a lot of things going on. We see that in the past years, people in running data centers, they were not talking about environmental sustainability, but they were more thinking about eco-efficiency. Yeah. So they did not only want to have environmental progress, but also saving money. Yeah, saving money was often a key factor for the business. However, now it becomes aware to many operators that reducing the carbon footprint becomes more and more important, because global warming will lead to extreme weather conditions that will have an impact on data center operations. Yeah, do not forget extreme weather caused 2 months ago a lot of data center outages in Texas due to heavy snowfall, power failures, etc. And governments and grid operators, they actually should work with the data center operators how to determine how renewable energy investments can most optimally benefit the whole system, as well as contribute towards national energy and climate targets. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, the demand on data center services will continue to grow strongly. You cannot stop this, but as efficiency trends of the current technologies slow in the upcoming years, we need to have new, more efficient technologies to keep to keep pace with the growing data center demand.
Well, I share your hopes and your thoughts with you, Otto. Thank you so much. You've brought us a lot of information and inspiration.
So thank you, Otto, for this talk. We have talked about Europe, but data centers are growing all over the world. For example, also in the Middle East region. Are there carbon neutral requirements in the Middle East? A question from Sarah Zahidi.
Okay, very good. Well, if we talk about the Middle East, we are talking about a large range of different countries with all having their own policies. And what we see in the Middle East, that they are lagging a little bit behind Europe. Europe is actually a little bit forward running. But when I talk to my colleagues in the Middle East, I know that there is a tendency to actually save energy, of course, from a cost perspective. And we also see that a lot of governments in the Middle East, that they are now actually coming up with their environmental policies. But to be honest, I do not know whether there are any specific targets linked to those policies yet. But I am almost 100% sure, as they all signed those international treaties like the Paris Agreement, there will be targets also in the Middle East. Of course, generic targets for every business and individual in the countries, but maybe also specific targets for data centers.
A question then from John Leban. People who watch our online events might have heard of him. He's very enthusiastic about the Open Compute project. Very happy to hear that reducing the carbon footprint is part of the discussion. Now, we were talking about the EU Climate Neutral Pact. Are the companies that involved, are they measuring and also publishing the data center's whole life cycle carbon footprint?
Well, if we talk about circular economy, reusing the hardware, also thinking about the building materials of the data center building itself, then at this moment they are not doing this. The only thing they are encouraging is, of course, to recycle or reuse the equipment as much as possible. Unfortunately, I do not know the exact details when they talk about recycling and reusing of materials and the requirements to measure it. However, they will report to the European Committee at least once a year, where they are going to actually report on the main parameters that they have promised as targets in their documents.
Because that brings us to the fact that there's now a driver to be more energy efficient, because there's a return on investment. Now there comes a time, of course, that it is possible to even do better, but the return on investment will diminish. What will happen then, or what should happen then?
Well, I do agree that a lot of data centers, specifically in Europe, they have already picked a lot of what we call low-hanging fruit. So that means that when you start new projects, the energy efficiency gains might not be that large anymore. So the return on investment for new projects might become much longer. So when you need to present a business case to senior management on a new innovative project to become more sustainable, then you must take into account the benefits of being a green data center. And you also need to discuss with senior management the value of sustainability, because that should actually be defined already in the environmental sustainability strategy of the company. And to be honest, on the other hand, it might also be that new environmental regulations might force you to make investments with no or a very low return on investment. So the actually 1 or 2 year return on investment time for many data centers, it is past tense. So it will now be a little bit more complex to find a proper return on investment. But the strategic value and of course the impact on climate change is actually more important.
And if you say strategic value, are you talking basically marketing, or are there other things that you're thinking about?
Well, we are talking about marketing, but also we are talking about marketing. It is not only for customers, but it is also to make the shareholders happy. Yeah, if you can prove that you are a sustainable business, it will encourage investors to invest in your business, but it will also make your staff happy. So it will be more easy to retain your staff in your company or to attract new talent for your company.
Now, John Booth, who's Carbon3 IT, very passionate about this subject. Had to leave the session, but he had one last thought before he left. And that was that the EU Code of Conduct for data centers is all you need. There are 160 plus data center best practices. If you follow them, you're there. Is he right?
Yeah. Well, actually, in part he is right. Yeah. I think that the European Code of Conduct is a very valuable document. It's very practical. You can very easily implement this. However, be aware that there might be some other best practices which might not have been mentioned yet in the European Code of Conduct. And this could actually be that you, if you just follow what is already invented and implemented in many data centers, then maybe well, you will become a little bit less creative. Creativity is actually very important when you're running a business.
About running a business, every business needs a place to put their data. That can be in a server room in the back of the building, can be co-location, can be cloud, hybrid. Boris van Leeuwen, who I suspect is Dutch, judging from the name, has a question. What is the quickest way to a sustainable data center? Keep your own data center, move it to co-location, or a hybrid model maybe? What's your thought on that?
Well, actually, when you are running a data center, you need to keep in mind that running a data center does not only have the purpose of being a sustainable company. So when you are running a data center, of course, first of all, you have to look at the availability of your applications and data, etc. However, if we take sustainability into account, maybe some data or applications can be outsourced to, for instance, the cloud, where the hyperscale data centers in general have actually an excellent performance when it comes to sustainability. However, the company's own strategy, their policies on security, but also the ability of an application, whether it fits yes or no in the cloud, might actually choose you to follow a hybrid solution. So a lot of companies in the future, they will use a hybrid solution, both using cloud and their enterprise data center, and maybe a co-location data center as a disaster recovery site, or maybe everything in the colo. It depends very much on the IT and security strategy of the company.
Of course, it's really based on what your company does, what the core thing is that you do. Yeah. But if you only look at sustainability, then you can have the advantage of scale. Now, Boris mentions that if you do it yourself, you have more control over over how climate positive you are. I would like to mention that a co-location company in the Nordics like Green Mountain now on its website has a tool where you can just see how much CO2 you would emit if you use their services. So co-location companies are being creative about that as well.
Correct. And many co-location providers, they also have online tools where they continuously report on the PUE, power usage effectiveness of their data center. Actually, it's a continuous monitoring tool that is available for their customers. So yes, those companies, again, being a green data center, has some advantages from a commercial point of view.
All right, I think we covered a lot of ground. Thanks for everybody for submitting your questions. Thanks,
very nice.
Otto, for joining us from the other side of the world.